and welcome to the Passion Witch Project. I'm your host, Emily Steckel, Reiki practitioner, pharmacist, and Passion Witch. And on this show, we chat with folks who are leaning into what makes them wonderfully weird and living their passion. And today, we are so grateful to be joined by Heather Stickney, the founder of Joyful Choice Wellness, an end-of-life doula. I am so grateful that you're here.
I am so excited to be here and looking forward to what unfolds with us today. Wonderful. And as we just said, it's going to be filled with magic.
It always is. So Heather, I'm super jazzed that you didn't look at these questions ahead of time because I really like when it just comes. The first question I ask is the hardest one.
Okay, I'm ready.
And I'll preface this by saying you don't have to have an answer and you're always allowed to change your mind.
Beautiful.
Right?
That works perfectly for me.
Excellent. Heather, if you could be the best in the world at one thing, what would it be?
Well, it's kind of an easy answer. It'd be like being the best human, but what is the definition of that, right?
That's a great question.
So it's interesting. I was just with a little lady that I sit with, and she's 90 years old, and earlier today we were having this conversation about what does it mean to be in your being and not in your doing, and how presence can be really so game-changing for anyone that you come into contact with, and that we never really know how our presence is going to influence the presence of another.
That's so true.
So I would say I want to be the best human that I can. Yeah. And I think that that's ever evolving for me, and it's really like this responsibility to humanity and also my own soul's journey of how would I want to be received by another, and so how can I receive someone else?
That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah. I love how it seems that integral to your understanding of humanness is the idea of presence.
Yeah.
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 I imagine that's a big factor in your work.
Definitely.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what end-of-life doula work looks like, what it is.
Yeah, so it's modeled after birth doulaing.
Yeah.
And so really, let's say, an ideal situation, or not ideal, but how an end-of-life doula might come into someone's life is upon either a diagnosis and or, that portion of the population that is very much a planner. Mm-hmm. So those planners that are going to their, estate planning, and then they just fold in with an end-of-life doula in terms of planning the parts of their legacy, of their journey that they might not be able to do for themselves later on. Mm. So there's a planning component that happens with end-of-life doula work, and then talking about those things like, what do you want when you can no longer advocate for yourself? Yeah. What don't you want? Mm. I mean, I've definitely had the experience of, well, I don't want my daughter-in-law in the room.
Okay.
So like honoring those parts of someone's lives, and then there's really the sitting vigil and the preparation of like, what is your legacy? Yeah. So there's a lot of like, what keeps you up at night, and also, what do you want to be remembered for? How do you want to leave your fingerprint on your life? And that can look very different for lots of like everyone has their own unique way of wanting to express that. Yeah. And some people it's through what they give back. Some people it's what they leave for their families. Some people it's that they want to be seen in having contributed something that some people maybe haven't even told anyone. So it's that question is always, it's kind of like your big opening question, right? And then that trajectory kind of goes into being able to support the person who is actively passing once that time comes. So sitting vigil, helping families. So in my case, being able to really help families decide, like, is it time to engage with a hospice organization? is it time to have a different transition? Like, is home no longer safe? Just because of my background in assisted living and helping thousands of families in assisted living and in hospice. So, and then we get to the person is maybe in their active dying phase, and supporting the family, supporting the person, reminding the people that are supporting that person, and holding all of it, holding all of the emotions, holding all of the fears, being able to be a safe place for people to talk about what they're afraid of, and also to be able to have that person's wishes upheld, and reminding the family, and being the advocate for the person when they no longer can be, if they don't have a designated advocate, or supporting that advocate. And then, following the family through that next phase of the grief portal, and navigating what is a new normal. What does that look like? I don't know if you've ever lost anyone close to you, but there's usually this buzz that happens, and there's like a flurry of activity that happens after someone dies, and then there's a flurry of people that are usually there, and then people start to slowly like peel back and go back to their lives. And so really being able to be there to catch that family member, or the children, the grandchildren, like whatever that situation looks like, so that they can process what they just went through. And sometimes these things happen quite quickly, even if we know that someone has a diagnosis. The shift can really happen quite quickly, or it could have been that the person had a life-limiting illness for a long time, but you can never prepare someone for the moment that their loved one takes their last breath. Yeah.
It's so beautiful hearing you talk about what you hold in your work, right? I mean, we can talk about holding space. You're holding that, the person who's dying, you're holding their life, right? You're holding their life, but you're also holding the grief and the just the myriad emotions of many other people who are present in that experience. Like, I mean, the heaviest, hardest things to hold, you are holding.
Yeah. And I was built for this, really. I believe
this is what I want to hear more about. How did you come to this?
I believe it started when I was little. In my family, we had significant loss. From the time I was about 2 was our first significant loss, when my grandfather died unexpectedly, and just really every couple of years after that, and just watching what that does to a family, watching and not really understanding. I definitely didn't have words for it then, but knowing how it felt to be a child experiencing loss, and not to necessarily have a place to be able to talk about it, and then feeling into like the journey of that time and time again. And then when I was 17, I was a hospice volunteer. And I had this beautiful woman that I met with, and she was hilarious. And she gave me this one piece of advice. I am 17 years old. She's like in her 90s. And she said, "Why do you want to come sit with an old lady like me?" And I said, "Well, because you have a lot of wisdom to share." And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I have one regret. Do you want to know what that is?" And I said, "Of course." And she said, "It's that I didn't let my dishes sit in the sink while I could, so I could play with my kids and my grandkids, because now I can't." And I still get goosebumps when I share that story with people, because I think that life is really precious, and I think sometimes we can forget how precious it is, and we get caught up in all the doing and all the pressures to be something that somebody else maybe wants us to be. And so anyway, long story short, I think I was made for this. My grandmother was a primary caregiver for me, so I spent a lot of time with elders and seniors, and growing up, and just watching how losing someone pivotal can really influence and impact your life, and how it can change the trajectory of your life, and what a good death can really look like, and what a not so great death looks like, and how to pick up the pieces from both of those. Yeah.
In your work, what does it look like for you to help facilitate a good death, as much as it's in your power to help do that?
Yeah, so I think that talking about it and understanding what somebody wants is really, can be one of the most empowering things to do for not only the person that's wishes you're upholding, but also for the family. I know that I've been in that situation personally. My grandmother and I had a very open line of communication, and I actually came back here 18 years ago to care for her when she needed more care. And we got to spend 5 years together, really like spending time talking about the things that were meaningful for her in subtle ways. Like, it's not necessarily that we're sitting down and I'm like, okay, let's talk about death today.
Right.
But I got to really understand things from her perspective. And when it came to her planning what she wanted for herself, I knew really clearly what it was she wanted, so that when the fear and the emotions and the actual time came, I knew what she had wanted, and I could hold that for her, so that she could be in her process, so that she didn't have to feel like she had to continue to take care of everyone else like she had done her whole life. And so a good death, I feel like, is also the golden thread that weaves into the other work that I do in terms of the empowerment coaching and the transformational coaching, because I feel like when we allow ourselves to live a fully lived life, we can live a fully lived, like a good death, because we haven't been operating from that place of fear around living. And so did that answer your question?
It did, absolutely. You know, the thought occurred to me to ask you about other folks and their regrets. I imagine people are comfortable sharing some of those with you, like the 90-year-old that you talked about. But I think instead I'd like to ask you about some of your life coaching. I was looking at your website and I saw that sometimes you facilitate fire walks.
I do.
And I thought, that's cool. Like, talk about a way to really show yourself you're alive. Tell me more.
To stand at the edge of your own fear.
Exactly.
Because fear interrupts us in ways that we aren't even conscious. And so, tools and experiences like fire walking are really a way to be able to step through that fear. Doesn't mean that the fear is not there. It doesn't mean that the fear of death isn't here, right? And yet, how do we fully live? How do we fully embody and keep the promises that we make to ourselves? You know, those promises that we lay in bed or we journal. I want, to live this particular way, or how do we really keep those promises to ourselves? And I think standing at the edge of a fire walk can be really like standing at the edge of a threshold of your life. And so it to me, it feels like it all weaves together. It all plays together. And also that can be a very transformative way to release emotions that you maybe don't have other places to be able to release them. So the tradition that I am trained in fire walking honors the snake, the puma, and the condor, which is a very Mayan tradition. So it's done and held in a very ceremonial way, in a very ritualistic way, and really helps the snake is all about shedding. What are we shedding? What are we no longer wanting to carry in our heavy backpack? What backpack of somebody else's are we no longer wanting to carry? And then the puma is all about like the courage, the like activating the power center within us, activating the parts of ourselves that are afraid and are going to do it anyway. And then the condor is that taking flight, like actually like having the long vision, even if the vision is just a seed inside. And, you know, I think some people can get caught up in like, well, I don't see things, or I don't know what my like outcome is meant to be. But it's really about having that like little flame that we just keep feeding, that little flame inside of us, and then staying on track.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing. Have you ever done one?
I haven't, but I was looking at your website and I was thinking, I think this is an experience I have to have.
Yeah.
What have been some of the most formative initiations for you? Moments when you did step into that fear and say, you know what, I'm doing it anyway because I can't not.
Yeah. Well, I would say my first experience with a fire walk was that standing on the edge of that fire and just being willing to take that first step. Countless number of initiations in my life. I think also leaving corporate America and stepping fully into my business. I've been building this practice and cultivating these tools for the better part of 20 plus years, and always stayed in the safety net of a corporate structure, and stepped out about 2.5 years ago. So I would say that was an initiation, and continues to be an initiation on so many levels of, all the places that we get. It is a powerful soul's journey to step into entrepreneurship, for sure.
It really is. Yeah. Tell me about that moment when you knew, like, it's time to leave this.
So I would say that it was like tiny little moments that led up to it. And at the time I was working in hospice, and over the 6 months prior to me giving my notice, we had brought on over, I would say, close to a dozen people that were in their early 50s.
Okay.
And I was knocking on the door at 50.
Yeah.
I was 49. And I was like, wow, if I don't take the leap to do this now, I don't want to have any regrets. This reminds me of, I was in a women's group, a priestess training years ago, and one of our exercises was to write our own eulogy and stand up and read our eulogy. And the opening line of my eulogy was, "She lived a life unlived." And so when that was all happening, it felt like that moment like rushed back for me. And I was like, I'm unwilling to live an unlived life. So I would say that was a pretty big moment. And it was like tiny moments, right? It was like a knowing, it was trusting myself, it was, all of those things. So
when now, right, a couple of years after that, when do you find yourself feeling the opposite? Like, I'm living my life.
Such a great question. I would say on the daily, really. And for me, it didn't like one day I didn't wake up and I was like, oh my God, I'm living my life. But there is something really beautiful about keeping those promises to yourself and showing up for yourself and being able to authentically design your life with what your inner rhythm is, as opposed to, I think we are all conditioned and indoctrinated into these ways of being, right? We go to school and, that has its own constructs of what that looks like. And so to be able to, for really like the first time, to be the co-creator of how my days look, there's huge sense of freedom in that. And one of the greatest joys that I have is when I get to see my clients have that same actualization. I had a client the other day that called me and she's like, I just need to tell you this. I was having a conversation with my friend and I realized that I'm living the life I've wanted. And so just those moments where we can recognize that we are keeping those promises to ourselves and we are living what is aligned for us, and that no one can tell us what that is. And so being able to give permission to ourselves, to each other, to follow whatever that is for ourselves, and to really co-create what that looks like. So,
I love that. I think for so many of us, myself included for a long time, it's hard to even know what that is.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel? How do you feel that clarity came for you?
Well, I think it's ever evolving, honestly. I do. I think it's following the breadcrumbs. It's saying yes.
Yes, the cosmic breadcrumbs.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's following that one step at a time. I think it's also, a lot of the work that I do is very somatically based. And so I always bring it back to the body. What is my body saying? Because the mind can tell us all kinds of stories. And the body usually has the wisdom.
Yeah.
And so I invite myself and others that I work with to come back to the body and really keep checking in. And that's where I think human design is like a roadmap or an energetic blueprint, if you will, to kind of fast track people to know what pathway is my pathway of least resistance to follow. So, but I would say coming back to the body, asking the body, returning to the breath.
Yeah, I noticed on your website you have several different somatic practices. Chakra dancing, which tell me a little bit about that one. Yeah.
So chakra dance was developed by a woman in Australia, Australian woman. Her name is Natalie Southgate. And it's a movement therapy modality that's steeped in Jungian psychology. So it really helps to reconnect and rebalance the chakra system through movement that is very authentic to you. And I love it because it's always different for people, and how like their body can move very subtly and they can have profound shifts. It can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be spiritual. I've had people come in with tremendous amount of, hip pain, back pain, and after class they leave and it's feeling relieved, or, a lot of heartache or a lot of grief, and moving through that can be really such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, there's something so profound about sitting with it, being with it.
And not pushing it away, and I think that also speaks to being able to be in spaces where you can sit with it, and having and cultivating community or support around you that can hold you. I don't know about you, but I grew up with the understanding that the only emotion that was helpful for me to have or was acceptable was a good emotion. And so I think that this soup of life that we're in, we are humans with the full spectrum of emotions, and to be able to find spaces for us to be able to be in our fullness, to be in that full expression of what it is to be human, I think is such a beautiful thing to be able to call into our lives, and I think it's such a gift.
We came to feel it all.
We did.
We came to feel it all.
We did.
It's funny. I think about your work as an end-of-life doula, and how holding that kind of energy, I imagine it's opened up opportunities to hold so much else in your day-to-day.
Yeah. Yeah, I often say to people, I think people will sometimes apologize for the bigness of their emotions. And you never have to apologize for the bigness of what's happening inside of you, or the feeling that is so explosive, or I think some of our emotions are vastly misunderstood. And when we can allow them to move through us, when we can allow them to inhabit us without taking us over, I really think that's such a gift. Such a way of being able to be fully expressed.
Yeah. I've had this conversation before. I'm curious your take on it, where, allowing ourselves to be with the more challenging aspects of the human experience, right? Allow ourselves to be with anger and grief and disappointment, right? To allow ourselves to experience that, it opens up greater capacity for the opposites.
100%. Yeah, I think, when we experience a depth of sadness or grief, it really simply is letting us know that the capacity of the amount of love that we have, the amount of joy that we can experience, it's two sides of the coin. And I think when we let the emotion be the emotion, and we don't identify with it, or we don't create a story around it, that creates that momentum, that movement, that ability to be, create a sense of freedom in ourselves, in our way that we interact with the world. And that there's no fixing, like that nothing needs to be fixed. There's nothing broken.
I wonder too, as you're working with family members who have lost someone, and they are experiencing this deep grief, or the many other complex emotions that happen surrounding death, to facilitate their movement through that, to help them maybe. I guess what I'm getting at is, our minds are going to tell stories.
Yes.
That's just what they do, right?
Yeah.
Are there ways that you help people tell stories that are maybe helpful, rather than, making it a part of your identity in a way that keeps you stuck, or something like that?
Yeah, I would say everything that I do, all of my work is about empowering choice. And that even in those moments that feel like, yes, we are going to be in the heftiness or the heaviness of that emotion, and what is the gift in that? Where is the like I referred to before, the golden thread, and how can we then be at choice to be able to, when we are through some of the initial grief or anger or sadness, how can we then choose to focus on that?
Heather, so beautiful. How could someone find you if they wanted to work with you and continue this education, this experience?
Absolutely. So my website is joyfulchoicewellness.com. My email is the same, joyfulchoicewellness@gmail.com. Those are probably the best ways. I'm also on I'm on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all the ways. So
thank you again for being here, Heather, sharing your wisdom, sharing your kindness. It's been such a pleasure.
I could talk to you for days.
Oh, same. Yeah, same.
We'll probably have to do this again.
We'll do it again. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you all for joining us on this week's episode of the Passion Witch Project. We'll see you next time.